When you're parenting a child on the spectrum, leaks at night aren't just mess, they're stress. Nundies are comfy, high-absorbent pants made for kids, so mornings start fresher and less frazzled. Plus, get 30% off your first order with the code Wita30 at confidenceclub.com.au.
Hello, and welcome to Wine with Wita, the podcast that is dedicated to engaging with health professionals and caregivers in meaningful discussions. I'm your host, Rita Shamoon, or as my clients call me, Wita. I'm a pediatric speech pathologist, and I am so excited to have you here. Each week, we deep dive into connecting you with caregivers and healthcare professionals, sharing their insights, stories, and key takeaways to help you with your child's diagnosis and your journey. Whether you are a parent, healthcare professional, a lifetime learner, or simply a wine enthusiast, you're in the right place. So let's sit back and relax and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone, and this is Wine with Wita. I have another amazing episode filled with vulnerability, honesty, and a mother's perspective about raising a child with special needs. I have the ever so elegant and beautiful Porscia Lam, who's based in Melbourne and the author of this remarkable book called The Unlocking an Autism Story. Welcome, Porscia, to Wine with Wita.
Thank you so much, Rita.
Now, Porscia, I met you last week, and this recording will be released later on in the year, but it is now May 2025, and I met you face to face at your Sydney book launch of The Unlocking an Autism Story. And I was just so drawn to you as an individual, but also your aura and your honesty with how you experience your child Harry's diagnosis with autism. And what I loved about your story is that you didn't hold back. And in society, many individuals hold back because of fear, because of judgment, because of the stigma associated with it. And your story, Porscia, needs to be celebrated, because the more we can have these open, honest conversations with each other, the more we're there to support each other and help people get out of the darkness that they're living in. So, Porscia, the floor is yours on Wine with Wita. Please tell the listeners about who you are, your beautiful family, and then we'll discuss the book.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks for having me. So my name's Porscia. I am a corporate lawyer by background, but I only recently returned to work. I spent 3 years as a full-time carer to my son, Harry, who was diagnosed with autism in the middle of the pandemic, and we're from Melbourne as well. So we had a pretty dreadful experience with lockdowns over 2 years. Harry is now 7. He is a pretty confident and flamboyant little boy. But to give you the full picture of, how we got to where we are, I sort of have to go back to when he was 2 years old in the middle of the pandemic and completely stricken by his separation anxiety and unable to tolerate even a drop of water on his pants without needing to change his pants straight away. Barely eating any solid foods, really severe speech delay, and this need to just avoid, refuse and delay doing anything that needed to be done in a day. And obviously that was unfolding in the context of the background, in the context of the pandemic in the background. But we also had a daughter, a neurotypical child, Tessa, who was 14 months younger. So we went through some really dark times a couple of years ago. And as we were going through it and looking for therapies and early interventions that would help Harry, and eventually finding some that worked for him and helped him build skills, I realised that I hadn't had the time or the calmness of mind to record anything that I had lived through in writing at the time. So this book came about probably 3 or 4 years after that really critical phase when it felt like the world was galloping away from me and leaving us in this deep, dark hole. And finally things were looking a little brighter, and we had managed to build rapport with Harry, and he's able to learn some skills. And I sat down basically to do a series of what I now consider to be delayed journal entries to record what we lived through as a family. I think one of the things that happens if you are kind of a positive person generally is you quickly forget how bad things once were the moment they start to look a bit brighter. And I actually never wanted to forget what we lived through as a family. It was such a big part of, our family history. But I also think there's a lot in there that's valuable for other parents who now find themselves in this deep, dark hole, wondering if there's an end in sight. And that's how this book came about.
Yeah. You were so descriptive with identifying Harry's difficulties as well as the challenges you face with accessing services in the pandemic. I'm interested with the first point when you started to notice, I would say, unusual behaviors with Harry, which made you question, is this typical? Is this just him? Let's talk about those first signs you started to notice. And then at what point did you say, I need to consult other professionals to help me out?
Yeah, the very first sign we noticed was at 5 months of age when overnight Harry developed extreme separation anxiety. And it got to the point where we couldn't even leave Harry in the care of his grandparents while we were in the same room as them.
Wow.
Trying to get him to play with them in the living room while we cooked dinner, and it's just this really small open plan area. That was a source of extreme distress. And it must have just popped up the overnight on the day that he developed recognition between his parents and everybody else. And for him, there were only two safe people in the world. That was me and my husband. And everyone else, if they were friendly faces or familiar faces, they were still not safe faces. And what it meant was that for the next couple of years, and I'm talking a good 2.5 to 3 years, Harry was anchored to one of us almost physically the whole time. When he did therapy, we actively did the therapy with him. We didn't just sit in the corner of the room on our phone, because even that kind of, I guess you could call it abandonment from his point of view, was a source of extreme distress. So I literally did all the speech therapy and the OT and the ABA therapy as a teammate to Harry in order to keep him engaged. So that was the very first thing. And I knew straight away that that was not an ordinary level of anxiety. There was just something that was such a fight for life or death that was coming out of him. It was like his life depended on it to be with me or with my husband. And, I looked around and I saw other parents able to walk back a metre or two from their child at playgrounds or play centres. I saw people having babysitters come over and just, leaving their kid to a babysitter they'd just met. And I was so far away from being able to do any of that. I also noticed that with his little sister Tessa, any kind of diversion of attention from us to her was again that fear of abandonment. It provoked anxiety in Harry. So I almost knew straight away, maybe not the word autism, but I knew that there was something that was not standard about Harry, even at 5 months. And then the things just kept adding on. Like every month, something new would come up. The perfectionism and OCD with like drops of water on his clothes was particularly distressing. It's hard when you're looking at a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old and they can't even tolerate a drop of water falling from their drink bottle to their pants. And I didn't see any of that around me anywhere. So it was just the accumulation of things that eventually led me to think, I think this is what autism is. And I said that as someone who knew not much about autism. I had a very superficial understanding of it, but it just sounded like it in the back of my head.
How did you feel in that moment when the characteristics or the unusual the atypical characteristics just kept piling on top? For example, separation anxiety, to then the water dropping on his clothes, to then the food refusal, till then limiting his communication. Did it feel like an endless train ride of and then, and then, and then? And did it make you feel so overly confused, or just you wanted to surrender it? I'm interested in how you felt in that moment.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I now notice with hindsight is when you first start thinking, maybe it's autism. Like every parent has that first moment where they're like, maybe it's autism. From that point on, at least in my household, things got a lot worse. So it wasn't
Okay.
like that was the peak point. Oh, it must be autism. Now get the services in place, things get better. It was like, oh, that's autism. Oh, there's more and more and more. Um,
Mm,
so I wasn't really expected for that. Like you come to the realization and it still keeps piling up.
mm,
It takes a while, even after the diagnosis, to then find the therapists and the approaches
mm,
and the strategies that work. So it can keep piling up for, a year or so after that moment
mm.
of realization. How did I feel? I probably felt a lot of fear every time I tried to look into the future. Every time I tried to think about what Harry's going to be like in 5 years, that was scary, but even more terrifying was what he might be like in 10 years. And I think what I was most scared of was that Harry was going to stay at that level of function forever, because at that point, when we were just experimenting with therapies and approaches and ways to build rapport with him, things didn't work out straight away. So the first few psychs and OTs that we saw weren't the right fit for him. They were probably great in their field with many other people, but it just wasn't right for Harry. And so he refused to do therapy. He refused to be engaged. He refused to learn any of the skills we were trying to teach him. And it only takes a couple of, failed attempts before you start thinking, well, no one's ever going to make a breakthrough with him. No one in the
Yeah.
world has the skills to deal with my child. So there was a lot
Did
of
you feel
catastrophe.
helpless?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I started thinking about what else I can abandon in my life to make myself even more available to Harry. So there was like, my mind just turned to what else can we give away? Like, what other joy is there that I can give up so that I can help Harry more?
Yeah.
It was a bleak time in our lives.
Yeah. I can just imagine you being on autopilot the whole time, getting ready for his next tantrum, getting ready for his next separation anxiety episode, getting also trying to be on alert so he doesn't hurt anyone around him, or so your mental health can also be protected to some degree. Looking back, could you give your younger self any advice with how you could manage that differently?
I think I'm someone who likes to find solutions, and I
Mm,
expect the solutions to come quickly and have an effect quickly.
mhm.
And I realise now that autism and therapies that might help an autistic individual are generally a really long game. It's
Yeah.
about breaking down challenges into tiny bite-sized pieces, particularly the most challenging and most difficult challenges. And tackling the tiny little bite-sized pieces a day at a time, adding the tiniest little bit more on, so the increments are so small that they don't provoke anxiety in the child, and you often don't see progress happening while it's happening. You notice it 6 months down the line when you look back and go,
Mm.
oh, actually he wasn't able to wear shoes a few months ago. Now he's able to wear shoes. But at the time that was unfolding, it was so slow. You don't know whether you're ever going to
No.
get to that point. So I think the lesson that I've learned and what I wish I had known at that time was that phase where you're learning about your child and building the connections with your child and discovering what kind of strategies and approaches work. It feels really nasty at the time because they're not skills that you come with. They're skills that you're having to learn on the job. And if I had known that all of those difficult moments were actually signs that I was finally learning about my son and building the connections that I needed
Yeah.
to with him, it would have made it much easier to actually, keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. I think they would also support it with acceptance, acceptance of what the diagnosis means for your child and your family, and how moving forward navigating problems that you encounter.
Yeah, and I think the acceptance, like that's still a piece where I like a day at a time now. I'm like, oh, I understand more about autism because now I'm
Mm.
listening to accounts from autistic adults,
Mm.
particularly autistic adults who have avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is what
Yeah.
has, one of the main drivers of Harry's really extreme picky eating, and
Mm.
also autistic adults who have pathological demand avoidance, which is also one of the features of Harry. And now, over the last year or so, really listening to their accounts and their explanations of what goes on in their head. Even since I've written this book, my knowledge has grown so much. And I feel like that acceptance is not necessarily in anything that I do or don't do actively with Harry these days. It's just there in the back of my mind so that I read him a bit better. And I
Mm.
know, if on a particular day he's refusing to do everything, I now know that his general anxiety levels are high. It's not that he's being bad that day. Like I can
Mm.
see that as a cue of what it's saying about how he's feeling about his place in the world generally and how anxious he is about stuff more generally. And that's something that, I continue to learn. It's a
Yeah.
discovery I've made in the last couple of months about him.
Mm. It's like his behaviors, his communication, and try to interpret what's he telling you
Yeah,
through his actions, and how can you navigate it rather than somewhat disciplining it, because
yeah,
it appears as something that's for so many people is something you need to discipline and put boundaries on, but really it's his cue of telling me I'm feeling very overwhelmed right now. I can't cope with all of this sensory input. Help me navigate this to help regulate my nervous system too.
that's right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's something that the way he exhibits his anxiety changes as he grows up. So what
Mm.
in his early years looked like refusal, he would just refuse to do anything, refuse to change his nappy, refuse to wear a hat, refuse to get into the car so that we could get to a paediatrician's appointment on time.
Mm.
He just said no, no, no to all those things. Now he rarely says no to those things. You can get him to do most of those things, but his anxiety shows in different ways. Maybe he tries to be really controlling about where everyone sits at the table, or
Mm.
what order we do things in as a family. Like if we play a game, he's got to be the one to choose the game
Control.
for the whole family. And it took
Mm.
me a while to recognise, because for a while I was like, oh, he's just being really controlling. He's really, really controlling. And I realised after a while that it had switched from his anxiety being refusal to his anxiety being trying to control his surroundings so that he's
Yeah.
not as uncertain about what happens next.
Mm.
Yeah,
Predictability.
always
Yeah.
learning. Yeah.
Mm. I really appreciate the fact that you said the therapy doesn't work for all children. Now, as a clinician, as a speech pathologist, we are typically the first point of call when a pediatrician refers a child with a communication disorder, particularly autism. And they would recommend a specific speech pathologist, or you will go on Google and find someone relevant. But it is vital, and I stress that word to anyone listening, it is vital building connections with that child determines the success of treatment. Now, sometimes speech therapy doesn't work for all children, and it's about finding the right services. On your journey, Portia, you spoke about the hardships and the challenges that you faced with accepting the idea of ABA,
Mm,
especially with the adult recounts of their own personal experiences who had ABA treatment and the conflict of information from different health professionals. Now, I know in our industry, ABA has its negatives, but also it has its positives. And over the duration of my career, I've learnt we need to respect the parents' wishes. And even though in speech pathology, this is what we target, this is what we address, sometimes it just doesn't work for these clients.
mm,
And we need to respect what the child presenting with and the challenges the family unit is presenting with. Let's give it a go. Let's see if this approach is best for the child and respect that industry as well. Portia, could you give your insight to how you felt when you were overcome with the emotions of reading the backlash, I would say, to then being in the lived experience of the therapy process of ABA.
Yeah. So the journey of early intervention is a really big part of this story. And we did all sorts of therapies. So we started with speech therapy, and that was great because it built the language skills that allowed us to do everything else. We also did psychology and OT. I thought that they were probably going to work at the time we started it, but they didn't seem to be intensive enough. So Harry's behaviour was extremely consistent and extremely pervasive. It affected every moment of every day because his demand avoidance applied to anything that we asked him to do. If we said, let's go to the playground, even though that's a source of joy for him, a known source of joy, the fact that someone else was saying, let's go do it, or let's get there by a certain time, was immediately anxiety provoking to him. And what we found was that therapy that was done, once a week or once every 2 weeks wasn't enough to help us address this behaviour. And that's how we've found ABA therapy. We were just Googling, looking for other therapies we could try, speaking to friends who worked in education or in paediatrics who could point us in the right direction. Eventually we came across ABA therapy. That has polarising opinions because when it was first rolled out in the 70s and 80s, that was obviously a really different time. Autism was seen very differently back then. Disability was viewed very differently back then. You hadn't heard of words like diversity affirming or person-centred. It was about making that child look less autistic. Like that was
Yeah. Or
kind of
even fixing or curing the
was
autism back then.
that was what. Yeah, it's what the developers of ABA were aiming for because that was the time frame that they were working in. ABA has changed a lot over the decades, and unfortunately, some of the commentary still exists out there and gets handed down from one generation to another. So we were intimidated. We read these accounts and we thought, when you hear the words, oh, this is harmful, as a parent, all you want to do is stay well away from it. I look at my little boy and think he's struggling so much, he's so challenged already. The last thing I want to do is try something that's going to be harmful. The thing that got me across the line in the end was that most ABA therapy, because it's done so time intensively, we did it at between 15 to 25 hours a week for 3 years. Most of that these days is done in the home as opposed to in a clinic. And because Harry's separation anxiety was so severe, I knew that I was going to have to be in the home doing the therapy with him. And that in the end was my security blanket because I thought, if there is something harmful that is happening, I will be the first person to see it. I will see the distress on his face. I will see his refusal to engage with the therapist, his refusal to enter the room where the therapist is. Like all of those are the telltale signs that he doesn't want to be there. So that's how I got myself across the line. And I did the therapy with him. Fortunately, we had incredible ABA therapists who listened to us when we described, this anxiety-driven need to avoid demands, and they shaped the therapy for his special neurobiology. So they gave him back lots of choices as they carried out the therapy. It wasn't like, just do this. They said, do you want to do this first or that first? Do you want to play with the blue blocks or the green blocks? Once you've done this, for your reward, do you want this reward or that reward? So every point in the process, they built in these choices for him, which immediately helped him feel less like he was under a direct demand.
And
They
more
were
in
also
control as well.
more in control. They were also very careful with the language that they used. So rather than say, Harry, touch your nose or touch a pair of shoes, because we're trying to teach him how to wear shoes at that point, they would say things like, oh, let's see who can grab the pair of shoes the quickest. So it was more of a race. It was like this indirect way of wording things. So it's like they were doing it collaboratively with him. They were also going to go get their shoes. And those subtle changes in the way you frame a demand to make it more collaborative and to make it more of a suggestion or an indirect request all helped to make Harry's anxiety at ease, to put his anxiety
Yeah.
at ease. He also had really particular special interests at this point. He was really into the
Yeah.
Incredible Hulk, and later he was
Yeah, I
into Harry
noticed
Potter.
that.
And they just built all of that in. So the
Yeah.
therapy sessions became one great big kind of role play as the Incredible Hulk or as Harry Potter. And because it spoke to his special interest, he was willing to stay engaged. And I think these comments that I make, our ABA therapists built them into the therapy, but equally, a speech therapist could do the same
Yeah.
thing, or an OT can use the same approach. It kind of didn't matter what therapy Harry was doing. It was the need to reframe it and reimagine it in a way that suited his
Yeah.
PDA brain.
Yeah.
That was the key to success.
Yeah. I love how you said that the key to success. And for anyone like that's an undergraduate or even an early clinician, for me, I realize this one of the biggest success for treatment is understanding a child's interests, following their lead, and most importantly, enter a child's world. Reduce the
Yes.
expectation for them to enter your world. Because when you enter their world, you're invited to an endless range of possibilities of language. And language doesn't have to necessarily be looking at a book together. It could be talking about, as in Harry's case, what the Hulk represents, or even what does the wand with Harry Potter do. And by doing that, you're then building connection, and then you're building that trust and gorgeous rapport, which would then lead to those other goals that you want to target in treatment. And I really appreciate how you stressed that he loved those things. And if it wasn't those particular items, you wouldn't know which way therapy would have gone, really.
Yeah, and I think one of the keys for Harry was that really great therapy for Harry just looked like play. Like if you were a set
Yeah.
of untrained eyes that just came to our house while therapy was underway, you would think that he was playing with a babysitter. And I think a really great therapist can just be play led by the child and play based and
Yeah.
find the opportunity to work in a skill here or there or lead to a
Yeah.
particular teaching target. I mean, I remember the first time watching a really skilled therapist do it, and I was like, I gotta learn that for use myself in the home, because it was done without causing any harm, distress, and Harry was actually thriving because he wanted to be engaged with someone, but it kind of just needed to be on his terms, especially in that first year of therapy.
Yeah.
Everything
Yeah.
needed to be on his terms. And then the more comfortable he got, the more we could stretch him a little bit and, develop the skills a bit further. These days, Harry can do so much without needing to do role play or have his special
Yeah.
interest with him. But I still see, like every now and then, when something is new and a little bit tricky, he himself directs it back to the role play. Like I can hear him
Play.
put on a little voice, and I'm like, "What's that little voice?" Like Harry Potter or something from Minecraft, and it's like he now knows. He's learnt for himself that he can do that to help himself learn the skill,
Yeah.
which is incredible when you think about it. That's a little
Yeah.
kid that's trying his absolute best with the skills that he has.
He sounds like such a warrior, such a gorgeous young guy. And he's experienced so much more than many adults. And the fact that he's able to push through just demonstrates his resilience, his adversity, and how he has overcome so many challenges. As a mum, I would be so proud of him. I would be
Yeah,
so just in awe of how much he's progressed. It's like a trophy, right? It's like,
yeah.
I'm so
And I
proud
think
of your success.
that's kind of why I had to write it, because I didn't want in my old age that I forget all the details of all
Yeah.
these hurdles he overcame, and also how creative he was in overcoming it, because all of that role play that he used in terms of doing his therapy, that came from him. He started
Yeah.
talking like the Incredible Hulk one day, and we just went along with it. And then all of a sudden, we realised it was easier to ask the Incredible Hulk to lie down for a nappy change than to ask Harry himself, and
Yeah.
that's how it grew. But we took his lead on it, and that was such a creative moment from him to find this way of allowing himself to be taught. So
Yeah.
I had to get it all down in writing.
Can I ask, Portia, how does the Incredible Hulk sound when you're asking to change his nappy? I'm just curious. How does it sound?
It's like Hulk smash, and he's smashing his fists on either side, but he keeps his bum still. So that was the most important. That was the most
That's so
important bit.
interesting.
The funniest thing is that Harry was great at the role play. It was like part of his natural talent to use that
Mm.
to help him get through the demands of every day. I often couldn't do it as well as him, so I'd sometimes forget and I'd call him Harry by mistake. And all of a sudden, he'd be cooperating, and all of a sudden, you'd hear the name Harry, and he'd be like, "Who's Harry?" and growl at me because in his mind, he was crystal clear. He was the Incredible Hulk. He wasn't Harry.
Did you ever have to be Hulk or speak like Hulk in an open shopping centre or out at a restaurant or just in the home environment?
Yes.
What's that
No,
like?
everywhere. So it wasn't me speaking as the Hulk, it was Harry speaking as the Hulk. So he would
Oh,
growl
okay.
at me, and we would talk to him like, in our normal voices. Um, After a while, because it went on for months, he was the Incredible
Yeah.
Hulk for months on end. And after a while, my husband and I said to him, "Oh, are you damaging your voice? Like, does it
Yeah.
hurt your voice to be growling like this all the time?" And I think it must have. So I came up with this idea. I said, "Harry, do you think you can be the happy Hulk and talk in a happy voice?"
Oh.
And he thought
Mm.
about it for a moment, and then he was like, "Okay, but then you got to call me the Happy Hulk." So that
Yeah.
became the new thing. So I'd have to say, "Oh, Happy Hulk, come with me," which was pretty bizarre for anyone out
Yeah,
and
yeah,
about,
yeah, yeah.
stores or whatever. But if I forgot and called him the Hulk, then he would start growling again. So it was all really
Yeah.
complicated. But in Harry's mind, he was crystal clear.
Oh, I'm sure you just saying "Happy Hulk, come to me" is so much easier than him having a tantrum or
Oh,
being defiant in the shopping centre.
yeah, yeah. And,
Yeah.
I didn't think twice about it because we were just so grateful to have found something that worked for
Something.
Harry, something that was able to get him to cooperate without it being distressing for him. I
Yeah.
didn't care how ridiculous I looked or what anyone else thought he was doing, growling through, 8
Yeah.
hours of the day. It was clearly a kid that was much happier than
Mm.
if we
Yeah.
didn't interact with him like that.
Yeah. I really appreciate how you said those words. I just don't care what I look like. It's for the best interest of my son. Now, in your book, you spoke about coming from a background where there's expectations placed on you. You're a high achiever. And sometimes when you do things out of the ordinary, that brings a bit of shame to your family. Now, coming from a Middle Eastern culture and being the first daughter, I understand that. I understand the need to be a certain way or to achieve a certain thing and not to do certain things so it doesn't bring shame to the family name.
Mm.
I was just thinking about you in your book with how did you cope with when Harry presented behaviors that were outside of the ordinary? How did you feel in that moment and how did you navigate it to overcome those challenges yourself?
I think my first reaction was I need to discipline him more. Like in
Yeah.
the early days, that's what I thought because that's what my parents did for me. And
Mm,
I had a pretty straight laced upbringing. I was a kid in the
mm,
80s, two Chinese parents. I did well at school.
mm.
Everything was about doing homework and being a good school student.
Yeah.
So the idea that I would have to speak to my child like the Incredible Hulk, it had never entered my mind. I
It
and
would have
when
turned
my
some eyes.
It would have turned some eyes, and I remember when we were first embarking on the journey of getting Harry's autism diagnosis. My
Mm,
mum did not want Harry to have that label of autism. She said, "Can I put my view forward to the paediatrician. She wanted to argue her case against autism. And I sort of had to explain to her, no, Mum, we want this. We want to get him help. We don't want you to argue the case against his autism. So that's what
Why
I was up
didn't she?
against.
She didn't want the label?
She didn't want the label. I think she thought autism could be overcome or fixed, or would be able to
Yeah,
disguise
cured.
at some point.
Mm,
And
mm, mm.
even to this day, I think I still hear her say things like, oh, you know, by the time he gets to grade, I don't know, 5, people won't notice anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's
Yeah,
her
yeah.
dream. I hope Harry is proud about being an autistic person. I've recently spent time in the company of autistic adults, young autistic adults, who are incredibly proud of their identity, and I feel like their positivity comes from their embracing this part of themselves. So I hope differently for Harry, but certainly my upbringing was very much that, autism is not something to display proudly,
Yeah.
and hopefully can be overcome. So that's what I was up against with my family. I think now they have come around to it. It's been a good 7 years now that Harry's been with us, and they can see that there's no quick fix. This is who
Yeah.
he is. But what we can do is build skills to help him be as independent and have all of the opportunities that he wants to partake in.
Yeah.
And he is a creative, enthusiastic, interested, and curious little kid. So I think my parents have finally come on board that that's a better way to view, the task we have of raising Harry, rather than trying to hide parts
Hide.
of him.
Yeah.
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 And I feel like
So true.
it's been a relief to just be able to say to people, look, Harry does some things a bit differently, or he eats very limited food. We need to bring his own food wherever we go, and this is why. It's because he has this diagnosis of autism.
Yeah.
And I don't need to concern myself with trying to, hide it or disguise any part of him.
Because
There's
that's
no
the way he
angle on it,
is.
just how he
Mm.
is.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because many families come from different backgrounds, and it's sometimes like a sense of relatability that, oh, my mum says that too. My mum goes against what
Yeah,
the therapists say, or even, oh, well, we can play with the child. You don't need to play. You don't need to pay a speech pathologist to play. And so it's so
yeah.
nice to hear your own lived experience, so other parents can build that courage to focus on what they need to do for their child rather than the opinions of others.
Yeah, and that line that you just used, we can play with the child, you don't need to
Yeah,
pay a speech pathologist, that I got that one exactly. It was like,
yeah.
oh, I can do that myself. Like, she's just watching the therapy unfold. I can do that myself. I was like, oh
Save
my
your
God.
money. We'll do it
Yes.
instead. I hear that
Oh,
every day, every day.
yeah. And I think part of it is just recognizing that, my parents are now old, and I don't have to completely change their views on anything, as long as they, are on board enough that they don't get in the way. It's
Yeah,
fine.
it's boundaries, having healthy boundaries
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Now, Portia, as a mum, as mums, and me in particular, I felt when I became a mother, my identity remarkably changed, going from successful businesswoman to then just sitting down, breastfeeding, trying to figure it out. And then you're questioned, how do I get back to my old life as I navigate this new life? How do I tap into what brought me joy before to this new world that I'm living in? Now, on the flip end, how could you describe that experience where you're first a new time mum and the challenges of Harry, but then how did you then somewhat shape your identity again to also like the new version of yourself?
Mm. So, I actually got a new job and returned from maternity leave. I'd taken 2 years of back-to-back maternity leave because I had my kids 14 months apart. And then
Hmm.
I'd got a new job, and I was like, I'm going to start this new job, relaunch my life. And it was pandemic. It was April the 1st, and Melbourne went into hard lockdown, and that was the day I started my new job. And by then we'd realised that Harry couldn't go to childcare because his separation anxiety was so severe. So everything was falling apart and not going to plan all at the same time. The first thing that happened was that my husband took 6 months off work to be the full-time carer for Harry because I had just got a new job, and after 2 years of not working, I couldn't just resign after a month. That's my, professional reputation that, I've already given up once and I wasn't prepared to do that again, not straight away anyway. But when it came time to make a longer term decision about who was going to be the stay-at-home carer, it came down to finances. Having a special needs child is expensive, even with NDIS funding.
Yeah.
And in that scenario, it was me who earned the least. It had to be me that took extended time off work. And it ended up being 3 years that I was at home with Harry. And I think when I looked at my son and saw how much he needed his safe people around in order to function at the most basic level, it didn't seem that hard to give up my job and my identity. But then fast forward 3 years and we've done the therapy and it's looking like he can go off to school soon. And he's a much happier little kid, much more regulated than he ever was. I, pretty quickly started thinking about my old life and what bits I could get back because that had been on hold for so long. And during that time, I couldn't even go out for lunch with friends because Harry needed me the whole time and he didn't like to be in the company of strangers either. That was also anxiety provoking. So I've been quite isolated for a number of years. And when it looked like, it was possible to send him off to school, I straight away started thinking, well, what can I get back for myself? And that's when I started looking for roles and looking to return to work again. I have to say the way I work, and I do work now, I work 4 days a week as a lawyer. I have to say I haven't gone back completely to my old self. The way I work now is a little bit different. I don't work as a permanent employee, I work as a contractor, freelance, because it gives me a bit more flexibility in terms of caring for my child, and also there's a lot less in terms of management expectations, and I guess just the more emotional commitment to a job. I do my job, I do it as well as I can, but then I kind of don't care about it too much once I clock off for the day. And I need that because my kids are still, Harry in particular, is still high needs. And we're at that point now where the ABA therapy, we're almost done with it because we've gotten everything we can out of it, but we need to look for the next thing that he might need, which might be psychology or it might be a little bit of OT. And all of those things take time because you need to find just the right person who has just the right kind of rapport to make those things successful. And so I've always looked at returning to work with a slightly modified lens, which is that I'm only going to go back maybe 70% of what I was previously because I've got this big part of my life now, which is my household responsibilities to my kids. But it was really nice to be able to go back into the workforce and feel like I could be productive in ways other than just in service of Harry. I did feel like I was very much shackled to him for 3 years of my life, and that sounds bad as a mum talking about her kid, but it was not a normal level of attachment. It was physical attachment much of the time. So going back to work has been really nice to reclaim a pocket of my identity, particularly because most of my friends work and juggle parenthood and careers, and I felt like I was on the sidelines watching everyone else, achieve things or be challenged and have success and, have fresh experiences, and I wasn't really getting any of that. So it was a welcome moment to go back into the workforce.
I'm glad you found some new pocket of joy just to fill your cup, because I know the challenges parents face when they're in trenches of the therapy journey with their child.
Yeah. And I think, now I reflect and I think it is possible to get back most of what you have, just maybe not all at the same time.
At the same
And
time, yeah.
yeah, and I think it's okay if you need to give up parts of yourself for a period of time, because there is a goal that might be more pressing and urgent at that point in time. And so, I've taken this moment, particularly this year, where I've written the book and I'm taking a bit of time out to promote it and talk about it. And I feel like, no, that I don't feel too guilty about that. I feel like that's, what I get for the 3 years of sacrifice I
Yeah.
gave previously.
It's your new journey and you deserve
It
to
is.
celebrate it because it's an amazing book. I have recommended it to many patients because it's so relatable, it's honest, and it gives a sense of like I belong to someone. Someone understands me, and it's on paper, which I think it's
Yeah,
really beautiful. So thank you. For
thank you.
anyone that wants to access this book, I'll include all the details on the show notes. Is it available on Amazon too,
It's
Porscia?
available on Amazon, Booktopia. It's stocked in many libraries and independent bookshops. So,
Yeah.
yeah, ask if it's not where you're expecting to
We
find
can
it.
we can find it for you. We can find it for you. Porscia, it has been a pleasure having you on Wine with Wita today. Thank you so much for your openness and being so vulnerable throughout the conversation. It's been a privilege, so thank you. Before we finish up, I ask all my questions, or I'll ask all my guests a question. If you were to be a better version of yourself tomorrow, Porscia, what word will you apply to yourself today?
I think the word that I would choose is kindness. I think kindness to myself, but also in my family, because I think the person who's missed out a lot and doesn't get a lot of credit for it is my husband.
Yeah.
I find dads often they don't share the story quite as openly. A lot of them are very hands-on, and um, they feel the hurt of their son maybe not kicking a footy or whatever it might be, sporting thing it might have been that they dreamed of. And they often don't talk about it, but they go through just as much as the mums. And sometimes I feel like I don't always acknowledge everything my husband's contributed, particularly when I'm out here telling my story. It's very much
Yeah,
a
yeah.
mother's story. But I would like to, remind myself to be kind to those around me who are also contributing to the outcomes of Harry and daughter.
Thank you for that. It's so true. Maybe he can become a guest on Wine with Wita next time.
I think I'll have
Pitch
to,
the idea to him.
I will.
Let's see how that conversation goes.
I'll
And
get
thank you
back to you.
everyone for listening. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for everyone for listening to Wine with Wita. And again, if you want to access Portia's book, it'll all be in the show notes, or you can find her on my Instagram handle. Thank you again, everybody. And another episode of Wine with Wita will be brought to your ears next week. Take care. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Wine with Wita. I hope you found some new inspiration, learnt something new, or gained a fresh perspective. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd be so grateful if you please leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the show get in the ears of new listeners, plus it takes 5 seconds. If you're keen for more strategies and insights, then head over to Instagram and follow RS Speech Pathology.